Welcome, everyone, to the With Grace podcast. I am so excited to have author, professor, educator, wonderful thinker, wonderful human being, Peter Atwater, as our guest here today. Peter and I first met on Matt Ziegler's Just Press Record podcast, which I will also link below for you to check out. It's a fantastic podcast, and we had such a wonderful conversation. To this day, Peter, I still remember the glow the glow I had after I came off of that conversation with you, because it just sparked so many ideas and tangents and things that I wanted to explore further with you regarding confidence and its relationship with our own humanity. And so I will also link his book below, but Peter is the author of The Confidence Map. And today just so happens to be the 1-year anniversary of its publication. So I also feel very honored that somehow by some synchronicity that we are recording this on the anniversary. And because I was so taken with Peter's approach to confidence, I also asked him to come to our Kizuna studio community, and he very kindly came in to give a guest masterclass that also left a profound impression on everyone there. So Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to see you.
It's great to see you again, Grace. And I have to say, I had a blast in our conversation with Matt. You sent me down a rabbit hole in terms of thinking about how musicians deal with agency or are not allowed to deal with agency. And so I've had a fabulous time since we spoke.
Wonderful. Oh, I'm so happy to be able to continue this conversation with you today. And I there's a lot I want to get into with you, but first I think in order for our audience to kind of understand some of the language we may be using, if would it be possible for you to explain your view and your take on confidence, which, by the way, everyone, when I heard this, my mind was just blown, but and how you frame it and the different quadrants?
Sure. So I think confidence has nothing to do with self-esteem or self-confidence or appearing to be confident, which seems to be a really popular element to current culture. To me, for each of us to feel confident, we need to feel that things are predictable, that there is a sense of certainty to what's coming, and that we have a sense of control in that future that we imagine. So there's a couple of things to unpack in that. Anytime we're thinking about the future, we have to imagine it. So there's no real prediction or forecasting. Often it's just pure imagination. We can come back to that. But we need to have both of these aspects, both certainty and control, to feel confident. Knowing that the road ahead is straight is wonderful. But if we don't know how to drive the car, we're not going to be confident behind the wheel. So why that matters so much is that those are two very distinct feelings. We tend to lump them together as a buy one, get one free. But the reality is they're separable. And very often in our lives, they're two very separate feelings that we experience. So let me talk about them together, apart, so that your listeners can get a sense for what I'm talking about. So I want you, as a listener, to imagine a simple 2x2 box chart with certainty across the x-axis and control across the y-axis. And think of them as high and low. The upper right-hand box, where we feel that we have both certainty and control, I call that the comfort zone. Why? Because when we have both of them, we're relaxed. Things are easy. We're nice. We're nice to ourselves. We're nice to others. We're positive and optimistic about the future. When I talk to athletes, when they talk about being in the zone, that's the space that they're talking about. I love, particularly with athletes, and for you as a musician, that box is all about fluency. It flows, it's easy. You could think of this as you've learned a second language. Whatever it is you're doing, it just flows without effort. You know the next word without even thinking about it. The lower left-hand box is where we have neither certainty or control. So there's a sense of powerlessness, there's a sense of uncertainty. And here I just pause for a second to say that's where we feel vulnerable. Vulnerability I define as being without certainty and control. So when we're vulnerable, we feel like we're powerless and things feel uncertain. So I call that box the stress center. Why? Because anxiety all arises from those feelings of powerlessness and uncertainty. And so you can think about that box as being, enervating. We get tired there. We're not necessarily nice to ourselves and others. Time passes slowly there. We're naturally impatient. And so that's a box. If you've experienced a traumatic event in your life, no matter its cause, that's the box that you've landed in. And in fact, the more traumatic the event, the lower and to the left that you've landed. A sudden trip to the emergency room will put you in that lower left-hand corner. You feel truly, intensely vulnerable. So when we think about confidence, those are the two boxes that we naturally associate with how we feel. But the reality is there are two other boxes, and we spend a remarkable amount of our lives in them. So let me talk about each of those. The lower right-hand box, where we have certainty but no control, I call the passenger seat. When you're on an airplane, with you're in the back of a cab or in the passenger seat of a car, you hope you have certainty. You feel like you have certainty, but you have absolutely no control. And often that arises because we've subcontracted work to someone else. When you go to a restaurant and you've ordered food, now you are waiting for it to be served. You are the customer. If you've hired a lawyer, if you've hired a doctor, that's a very common space for us to be in. The precariousness of that box, though, is at times it can feel like a prison. In fact, the lower right-hand corner would define a maximum security prison where you have absolute certainty but no control. And so it's a box that sometimes feels great, sometimes feels not so good. It's a function of how did we get there, why are we here, and what's happening to us in that experience. And then the last box I call the launch pad. That's where we have control, but we have no certainty. And that's where most of our decision making in life takes place. Every one of our financial decisions, borrowing money, lending money, investing, they all take place there. We're choosing to do something today, not knowing what the outcome in the future will be. And for some people, that's a scary place. They're afraid of making the wrong decisions or ending up in the stress center if they've made the wrong choice. For others, it's a very enervating or energizing experience. If you're an entrepreneur, it's an exciting place because entrepreneurs tend to look at uncertainty as possibility. So do a lot of creatives and innovators. I think of that box as a lot of initiatives, innovation. It's about me doing things. In fact, I've come to think of these boxes. The top right hand box is about E. It's extravagant. It's we're extroverted. It's a lot of X. Energetic. There's a lot of E words there. The bottom left hand one is a lot of F's. It's failure. It's a lot of really stressful, problematic things happen there. Failure,
Yeah.
and then the the um, the other box, it tends to be L words. We're languishing. We're it's so
Mhm.
so.
Yeah.
So I kind of think of these now as a life, that life takes us, LIFE, to all four of these boxes. Um, and so this is one of the things that I spend a lot more time thinking about, that each of these has its own personality and experiences that go along with it.
Okay, so much that I want to dive into. First of all, I love sort of this idea that first of all, confidence is not a fixed thing. That we are in constant motion through all of this, which I believe also, to your point, is not, life puts us there, right? Like depending
Yeah.
on what's happening or where we are, and because there's so many things, of course, that we don't control. I I wanted to
Yeah,
have
I think the
yeah
self-help world does people a big disservice
yeah
by proclaiming that once you have confidence, you will always have confidence. And so I don't think people should strive to for that. I think that's setting yourself up for failure. I think being successful is about resilience and our ability to feel comfortable in all of these boxes.
I wanted to ask you. This is something that has been on my mind quite a bit since I first heard this. Control, and this is just sort of my thinking of control has always been, in many ways, the greater the fear, the more the desire to control. That's how I've always felt it in my own life, experienced it in my own life. So I was wondering, in that launch pad, right? As the control increases, the degree to control, how does that manifest? What is your kind of take on all of that?
So I often use the term, for a description for that box, as being a rock climber. That you're, part way up the hill. You're not in the comfort zones yet, but you're looking down and you can see the stress center below you. And so, to your point about control, I imagine the hands gripping tighter and tighter and tighter. That when we are fearful in that box, we we hold our hands clenched. Um, and I think it's really useful for us to relax the grip. Relax the grip. Just, it's okay. You don't have to hold it too tight. And in fact, if you do, you're going to limit your flexibility and your ability to navigate and to change course as you need to. You're holding things in a fixed way as opposed to a flexible way, which is really needed in that box, because you're allowing yourself to be open to uncertainty. So you've got to be able to steer the car nimbly in that event.
I love that. And also, this kind of movement. Another thing that I really like about this visual image uh, you have of confidence is the fluidity between the different areas where something may initially be new and challenging, but eventually it leads to a fluency that is the comfort zone where we feel relaxed about it and able to do it. Um, the other thing that I wanted to kind of bring up here, because you brought this up in the studio masterclass, and I want to touch on it because a lot of the conversation I want to have with you today, um, as someone who's also a writer, I love your particular use of words and the choice that you have used in language and words to describe confidence, whether that's vulnerability and even things like the comfort zone, because the comfort zone is often thought of as sort of this place where, like a settling place, like we settle into safety, and then you challenge that in our masterclass. Could you talk a little bit about that? What comfort zone is to you, that quadrant?
So I think the comfort zone, particularly today, is a place of replenishment, that so many of us seem to be existing in the stress center, in the launch pad, in the passenger seat in our lives, that we need to find ways to get into our comfort zone, that to think about what are the experiences that we have, that we do, where we truly can relax, where time passes quickly, that feel effortless, that we need to spend time there because we're not there so much of our lives right now. And I don't think it's weakness. I don't think this is, I think that there's real benefit. I think about this in my classroom. My job is to take my students out of the comfort zone to introduce new ideas and new concepts. But I know, I can see it in their face that, okay, I got to get them back to the comfort zone for a little bit to reground them, to help them to see that they're back on stable ground before I can move them back to introduce yet another idea.
I love that so much. And I agree also in it's that discernment as an educator, right? To be able to kind of understand when they need that nourishment. When you describe the comfort zone, to me, what comes to mind as a creative is nourishment. And I know
Mm-hmm.
this also from my own past as whether it's as an author or as a musician, that if I'm executing all the time, right? Like if I'm constantly just outputting, I mean, there reaches a point where not only does the work suffer, but you personally are just so drained emotionally and mentally that you
Yeah.
cannot create anymore. It becomes impossible. So that's how, when you talked about that replenishment, it immediately, it struck me as, oh, it's that nourishing. It's the input that's necessary in order to be able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the topics that I always talk about in my class is food. And our conversation often starts around comfort food. So, where does comfort food happen? How does it happen? And what you see as students are talking about comfort food is they're visualizing this comfort zone experience. It's often with family or friends. It's around a table. There's, it's positive memories conveyed through a meal. And so I love the connection between comfort food and the comfort zone, because really what the comfort zone is about is finding your comfort food in life. What are those experiences where you feel most relaxed, most taken care of, most loved?
I love that. I absolutely love it. Do you think when we're in the comfort zone, which of the quadrants do you think is most challenging? For example, is it easier to move from the comfort zone to like the passenger seat, or is it easier to move from the comfort zone into the launch pad, or is it just dependent upon the situation?
So it depends on the individual, and so if I move into the passenger seat from the comfort zone, it's because I'm looking to be served. Whether it's I've hired a painter, I've gone out for a meal, I am contracting with someone to serve me. And often we will do that because we don't have the skills, we don't have the time. There are reasons that we do that. Um, but it's often a means to an end. It's not. It's not the place we want to remain. But there's an experience that goes along with that. And you can think about, if I think about experience brands, their whole focus is to um, encourage, if not seduce us into the passenger seat where they are providing the
Yeah.
experience to us. That's very different from moving from the comfort zone into the launch pad. That's that's us taking the initiative to try something new, to do it ourselves. I think of this as learning to ski, or things that are very active and participatory for us. And there it becomes a question of preparedness. If I feel prepared and ready, then I'm willing to do that. And sometimes that means I'm going to go from the comfort zone to the passenger seat, get a little class time, and then go do the driving class. So if I think of medical school, we take people out of the comfort zone, we put them in, the classroom, and then we say, okay, now it's time to cut people up. So,
Yeah.
so sometimes that's a natural flow, but those are experiences where you learn by doing, and those are different from learning in the classroom. And I'm a big advocate for both experiences. Labs in addition to classrooms. Internships in addition to other things with the students are involved in, but having opportunities to take control amid uncertainty is a skill young people especially, need to deliver, because
Yeah.
generationally, this is a cohort that were raised in the post 9/11 environment where safety was the primary function or primary objective. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so they were not encouraged to get into this launch pad.
Yeah.
They were encouraged to be followers, not, you know, folks jumping off a cliff.
Yes. This is so okay. All right. So we're kind of getting into okay. So I want to, there's 2 points that I want to talk with you about, and this is a perfect segue to it. First, before we get into the idea of agency, which I really want to kind of dive into you with about, I want to talk about this idea because it's been on my mind and something you just said reminded me of it. I've been thinking a lot recently about vision, possibility, what it means to be able to envision something. Is it something that we can teach? Is it something that is a natural gift? Why is it some people have a safer vision while others push boundaries beyond what most human minds can fathom? Of course, there's certainly imagination. There's a lot of components that are in there, and I think there's also an element of how strong or how do I say this? The strength of connection you have to your sense of self, like who you are. And I think of it certainly, of course, from an artistic standpoint, because so much of, and I spoke about this on our when we did that recording, the episode with Matt, about how there's such a huge difference between being a student, a musical student, and then really becoming an artist of your own right, in your own standing. And the difference is that kind of key. Like rather than adopting the vision or interpretation of someone else, your teacher, another artist, etc., um, to get to the point where you can say, no, this is how I view this piece of music. This is how I want to say it. This is my voice, the realization of one's own voice. And in order to be able to do that, it's this combination of vision and voice. I think this ability to know yourself, to be connected with yourself enough to stand in what you believe in or what you want to realize. At the same time, to craft a vision uniquely of your own means the capacity, the confidence, maybe I don't know what the language is here, but to be able to search for that, to search for it and to believe in that search, regardless of what the result may be. It's not a set destination, but the process of it itself. And so when I think of the Launchpad, I often think of that. I think of what it means to really be an artist, to jump into a place where, yes, there's no certainty. It's not a fixed destination, but the control comes from the empowerment of your own voice, your sense of self, and that's what we stand in. So I wanted to kind of just start with that.
Yeah.
Any thoughts around that?
Yeah. So I'm going to continue to play on this analogy because it's one that after we talked, I spent a lot of time thinking about it. Your background as a concert pianist, you were conducted.
Yes. Yes.
And so you were, as brilliant as you were as a player, you were expected to play the piece flawlessly.
Yes. Yes.
And in our conversation, you got me thinking about my son, because my son is a jazz guitarist. And his world is all about improvisation. And with his friends, with his band, just he loves the creation piece. And the ability from one night to the next to play the same piece in a completely different feeling and vision to what he was, what was, I will often say, so, Ben, what were you thinking while you were playing
Mhm.
that? And those to me are very different aspects of music. And I find it interesting because if I compare our how we teach art versus how we teach music, with music, we put people in the passenger seat and say, here's a piece of music, play this. With art, we give them a blank canvas, a white piece of paper, and say, create, which means go to the launch pad. And you see those who are comfortable following and those that are comfortable creating. And it's not a right or wrong, good or bad, but it does relate to who you are as a musician, as an artist. I compose, so to me, it's all about being in the launch pad and not caring what someone else might think or say about what it is that I've composed.
So this, I don't think I've shared this with you, but this just opened the door, another door in my mind. So one of the really fascinating things I learned throughout the years was actually when I left music, I became a fiction author, and even though they're both artistic fields, the difference, what I learned from being an author, was so radically different from what I learned as a concert pianist, right? And it absolutely ties into this point that you just brought up that, we the thing about classically trained musicians, just from my experience, is that because we are, again, given a score in which we interpret it, we have freedom there. We have freedom to interpret it the way we want. But it is a given score. We're not actually creating something. We're playing what's on the page. And more importantly, it's, to your point, that it's this level of you cannot make a mistake, right? That's the actual cage that you're kind of put into. You cannot make a mistake at a very high level in front of other people, live in performance at a certain. It's I often equate it to like Olympic level athletes, who have 20 seconds. They spent years training for 20-second performance at the where there's a high diver, something, and everything is built up to that moment, right? And it's similar in that way that you train, you practice, you do all of that so that you can execute flawlessly in a given moment live. And then I wrote my first novel, right? Which is completely different. It's you can write whatever you want. It's a blank page. You could, and as every author will likely test, I don't know. Maybe it's different for you, Peter. But that first novel is it's published, but it's not a great. I have to say I've
Yeah.
improved a lot since then. But it's a learning experience. We learned it. So when I put out that first novel, um, I was still conservative because my mind was still coming from the classical music world. It was extremely structured. I didn't allow myself really to kind of develop things in the way that maybe I really wanted, or took risks maybe that I did in later books. But in that first book, I did not. And what was so astonishing to me in that experience was when I wrote that novel, I approached it from a very classical music standpoint because I had just left that world. And I, every word, every sentence, I crafted, meticulously controlled it, all of that. It took forever to like work on it. And then because I wanted to make it so clear what my story was about, I wanted, you know, all of that to be so clear. But I realized once it went out into the world that the story no longer belonged to me. It doesn't belong to me. I may have slaved over every single word in that novel and spent embarrassingly long hours, just crafting the perfect sentence. But readers are going to take from it what they will. You have no control over that. They will see what they want to see in the story. They will interpret your words in however way they want. It is out of, and this was such a huge paradigm shift for me because I was so used to having this sense of control and making sure everything, and you go out on stage and execute and you don't make a mistake and all of that stuff. And then into this act of creation where just the process itself, the act of writing it itself, that's where the value, the freedom is, and the beauty of it, and all of it. And once it's out, the results, all that, you can't. I mean, there's nothing you can do. I mean, it's not yours anymore. It doesn't belong to you. So it just kind of brought that to mind for me, Peter.
Yeah, some of the best words of advice I got before my book launch was the advice that you've painted a painting, and there will be those that look at it and go, "Oh my gosh, that is so brilliant. I love the way you put that together." And then there will be those that look at it and go, "Ooh, that just isn't my style. That doesn't do anything for me." And that's how you have to receive the feedback. That's how you have to look at it. And you have to step back and say, "Hey, I'm just proud I painted a painting."
Yes,
That
yes,
somebody believed in me enough to say, "Hey, we'd like you to paint this for us." And to your point, the ability to get better as a painter, as a writer, is to get comfortable with who you are and your own skills, but also to connect with your audience. I love, there's a recent interview between Terry Gross from Fresh Air and Yo-Yo Ma.
oh,
And he speaks so articulately and so clearly about the feeling as an artist that your job is to serve your audience in that moment, to appreciate where they are, and that you are helping to heal, you're helping to inspire, but that you need to stop for a second to think about where are those who are, as a writer, opening the page, who are listening to your music, whatever your creative thing is, um, because you want it to meet people where they are.
yeah. I love. Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. Um, which leads me then to this idea of agency. And I had written to you that one of the things that, and I want to really discuss this because it's one of the things that is constantly on my mind as I do a lot of teaching and I work with a number of different people. I oftentimes, one of the number one things I come across are students or clients who are very much in that passenger seat. They are waiting for someone to tell them exactly the way to guaranteed business success, guaranteed this, guaranteed that. And one of my great challenges as an educator, and this is something I deeply believe in personally, is that an educator's job is not to tell you what to think, but rather to help you to think for yourself. And that has always been kind of my purpose as I work with people to help them discover for themselves their own individual uh, power, their ability to be able to understand and grasp themselves. Can you talk a little bit about that? Certainly, your background as an educator, first of all, in that I think you also might have some experience with this, and also in terms of the confidence map. How can we encourage others? How can we empower others? What is the way in which we can best help them to get into more of the launch pad? So,
So there are a couple of things. The passenger seat gives us tremendous certainty in exchange for no control. To move from the passenger seat to the launch pad requires that we trade both, that I give up certainty. At the same time, you are asking me to take control. So that feels like a perilous shift. It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. You're telling me I will have no certainty, and everybody's told me I'm weak. I don't have the ability to do this on my own. I'm not sure I ever have done it on my own. And so you have to help people to overcome two fears at once. That it's a let me help to prepare you so that when the time comes, you will have control, and let me help you to get comfortable losing certainty. And one of the things that I think is helpful to frame the passenger seat is that is often an environment of an abusive relationship where someone has either told you, or worse, you've told yourself that you're not capable of having control, that you'll never be anything if you leave this, that you're safer here than you are in the launch pad. And I think sometimes we hold ourselves hostage by the stories we tell ourselves. And the hardest sentence to write in my book was when I was discussing the passenger seat. And I wrote it without thinking about it. And then I just sort of dropped the pen, which was, while we can blame others for putting us in the passenger seat, it is our choice to remain there. And I stopped and I was like, holy crap. And it caused me to pause and think about things in my own life and the stories that I have told myself that were self-captive, capturing. These stories that allow you to take yourself hostage. And so, as you think about helping others to move from the passenger seat to the launch pad, it's about, how do I help you to feel comfortable in the discomfort of uncertainty? And how can I equip you? What are the tools, the resources, the contacts, what is it that you need to know that you have, the body armor, so that when you make that leap, you increase the odds of succeeding?
Set them up for success, as in that
Yeah.
sense. Okay, there's a lot that I want to dive in there. One of the things that right now that I'm deeply focused on in my own work is this idea of challenging the narrative, and I've created some educational initiatives around that. And when I say challenging the narrative, I mean it on many different levels: societally, culturally, internally. The stories, to your point, that we may be telling ourselves because of its tremendous power. And that also I have seen in the course of my teaching and working with people, that it's that narrative. I just want to kind of, I was laughing earlier because I was just remembering when you were talking about, like, when you tell someone, when you say, hey, here, let's go. I had an incident once where I was at a summer music festival, and there was a bass player there who did classical music but also did jazz, and he was encouraging me to play, just like improvise on the piano, and it ended up sounding like Rachmaninoff. It was so awful. It was so terrible. Like, I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? I don't have anything in front of me. And so I was just remembering that moment where you just feel so helpless. Yeah, to your point, like out of
Mm-hmm.
control. You don't know what you're doing. And
Yeah.
but going back to what you said about it, and you had talked about, trauma and certainly the things that happen to us, but it is up to us to be able to get ourselves out of that zone. I certainly have had many things happen to me in my life that have put me, traumatic experiences that have put me deep in the stress center. And I think, to your point, have absolutely placed me in the passenger seat for many, many years, because I felt that, well, certainly these stories that we tell ourselves that I don't deserve beyond anything beyond this, or I don't trust myself. That's a big one. Lack of trust. If I do it, if it's up to me, it's going to fall apart or it's not going to work. And a lot of these things. And but to your point, it is up to us. Although it's not our fault. And this is something I think I tweeted about this a few weeks ago because I was so irritated about how people were saying, everything happens for you. And I was like, well, that's no, that's a very sort of unnuanced take on it, because there are things that happen that may not be our fault, whether that's abuse, whether that's trauma, that of course very much shape our understanding of ourselves and of the world. But yes, it is up to us ultimately, though, to be able to take back that narrative and to create our own narrative, in order to be able to discover agency. Is there a particular, how do I say this? Do you think that, for example, when someone is in the stress center, because I've kind of bounced back and forth between the stress center and the launch pad, up and down. Is it, we were just talking about trauma and how I said I moved from the stress center into the passenger seat. Is that, in the research that you've done, in the work that you've done, is that more of a something that pops up more frequently, or do people head to the launch pad, or is there no really a correlation there? Yeah.
So there are 5 natural responses to being in the stress center. I call them the 5 F's, and you've heard me say them
Yeah.
before, but I will say them again. Fight, flight, freeze, follow, and fuck it.
Yeah.
We think about fight and flight as the 2 most logical responses, but they're not. Fight and flight are about going from the stress center to the launch pad. They're initiatives. And we have to have skills. We have to have resources. It's the pipe is burst and, you're running to Home Depot. That's hard. That's hard unless you believe you have the skills to navigate it successfully. Our most common response is follow. And follow takes us from the stress center into the passenger seat. We are following someone, you've called the plumber. Calling the plumber moves you into the passenger seat. You hope while he or she does the work, and then eventually you get to the comfort zone, but you're no longer in control. But we often forget that following is all about the story we're following. And so in the stress center, we will follow the story that is easiest for us to come to mind. Yeah, I'll go to Home Depot. I can fix this. I know that. It's easy. Yeah. I need to call a plumber. But it's going to be impulsive. It's going to be emotional, but it's also going to be cognitively the most simplistic story we can imagine in that moment. And so unknowingly, it's our stories that often move us into following others, following our own stories, particularly those that are driven by past experience, that put us in the passenger seat.
I was just thinking about social media as you were talking
Oh,
about. I mean, on a
you think
collective
about,
scale, yes.
yeah, you think about, particularly for women, you're not this enough, you're not that enough. Okay, so that puts me in the stress center. If I just follow cultural norms, I'll survive. I'll be in the passenger seat. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Social media. I mean, the demands for cultish behavior,
Yes. Yes.
for pure followership, is extraordinary.
And that's so interesting. So that's also interesting because, to your point, I guess, is it because the narrative is so simple enough that it's easy for us to follow that we do this? Or is it like a cognitive bias thing where we're looking for something that will match the narrative that we're telling our own selves? And I ask this as someone who spends time on Twitter. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's lots of repetition. It fits mood. It's, we're primed. It has all of the elements of cognitive ease. And in that moment, in the stress center, we will take the easiest story first.
I often see that, especially with young entrepreneurs who are in the stress center because they're struggling, they want to build something, and they oftentimes they will take what they perceive as the easiest way out because that's the narrative that fits, and they, okay, have a business up and running in 5 weeks, or you can be making this much money in 5, and they believe that because yes, it's the easiest way out of it fits into the cognitive ease to get out of the stress center. So then how do we, because this, going back to what I had said earlier about vision and cultivating vision and to be in that launchpad area, to your point, there is the story that we believe in possibility, in this ability to imagine, right? This kind of future. And you've spoken about this, but just for new people who have not heard this, could you talk a little bit about that? Your this ability to the future that we imagine and how that comes about. Yeah.
Yeah, so the future that we imagine is entirely predicated on our own mood. If I'm in the comfort zone, my future is bright. If I'm in the launch pad, my future is bleak. If I'm in the passenger seat, my future is driven by I will be the beneficiary or victim of that which controls me. In the launch pad, I will, my future. But what's so interesting about the decisions that we make in the launch pad is that they are all imagined outcome driven. So if I'm investing in a stock, I'm investing in it because of the future I imagine that comes from owning that stock or the future that I imagine of that company. So we have to be very careful not to fall victim to the stories that are based on our own imagination of the future, because the future is inherently uncertain. And so I will often say we need to plan for what we can imagine, but be prepared for what we can't. So that yes, plan for what you can imagine, because that's always going to be based on how you feel. But protect yourself by preparing for what you can't. And that's true not only when we're optimistic, but especially true when we're pessimistic. Because when we're pessimistic, we're not going to take enough risk. We're not going to prepare for what we can't imagine because it just seems unimaginable that things could get better. It's like, no, how would you prepare yourself in
True.
that case? And often it's really cheap and easy and it's I'm always struck by the cost of preparation when we, particularly as a group, are overwhelmingly one-sided on the imagination of the future. The cost to prepare for the other side is really cheap.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. It brings to mind something that um, I think is hard. I know for me personally, is sort of a challenging space to kind of occupy, which is that hope and disappointment exist in the same place. I had just done a newsletter recently. I had written something about how the word bet is such an interesting word etymologically and like its meaning because bet can indicate uncertainty, right? That you're betting on an outcome that we're not sure of. But bet can also mean certainty. I bet he'll be there tonight.
Mhm.
So in one very three-letter short word, we have uncertainty and certainty coexisting. And I use that example to kind of illustrate this idea that if we want to be the space in which we're surprised in a wonderful way, where hope exists and we're impressed, right? If we want that, we must also exist in a place where disappointment may happen. And we have to be able to reconcile those two, that they exist in the same place. If you want to have one, you can't have just have that. You have to be willing to be open enough to for either possibility to happen. And I think for me, and I related that to kind of like sort of my personal life, that I think that's a very hard thing, I guess, just in general, for human beings to grasp cognitively two very disparate ideas at the same time is a difficult thing. But for me, oftentimes what I realized was that in my fear of the pain of disappointment, the pain of rejection, I was also closing the door, by avoiding that and running away from that. I was also closing the door on the possibility of hope, on the possibility of something wonderful happening, which meant that my fear of that pain of disappointment equates to my fear of joy and whether I was worth that joy. And it was only when I came to kind of really understand, multiple truths to be true at the same time and to grasp that I'm better able to handle that. But it's still uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable because it's two very, very contradictory sort of ideas. Does that kind of resonate with you at all? I'm not sure if you've seen that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think a lot of people are afraid to be hopeful,
Yeah.
but because they'll often say, well, it'll be fleeting anyway.
Right.
And I I feel like I'm becoming more Buddhist in my thinking, which is, stick around, it'll change. Um, I want moments of disappointment. I want moments of hope. I want moments of joy or happiness, that I don't want to limit myself in ways that really suffocate both the beauty and the pain. Pain and beauty are vital elements of life. Um, we do. I wish all pain would be eliminated. Yes, but um, what comes out of that is love and community, and there are things that learning and knowledge and wisdom and resilience. So so I this is where again we need to accept that real life moves us around, um, and yeah, be hopeful. And in fact, I take it one more step. Um, Allow yourself to be joyful. Joyful comes from within. It's different from being happy. Happy
Yes.
is a response. Joy, when you think about joy to the world. We didn't sing happy to the world. It's joy is an internal feeling that seems to be um, really being withheld. People are afraid to be joyful, and joyful is your choice. I
Yes.
when I walk in
I
the
get that.
morning, it's like, wow, I am
Yes.
joyful for the day.
Mm. I love that. And that's also what I love about the way that you have presented confidence. And we've spoken about this privately, but just so everyone listening knows, this extraordinarily humanistic perspective of there's it takes away the judgment or the critical part of it, right? Where, oh, you shouldn't be like that, or you shouldn't. But no, okay, pain and beauty are all just part of the human experience, and to just without judgment to understand that, and that allows us to be able to understand ourselves better, and where we are. And to your point, that's something that we move. It's part of life. We're moving constantly between these different states.
Yeah,
How?
I wish we
Yeah.
would stop asking people is something wrong.
Oh, yes.
Because, because, you know, suddenly, when someone doesn't have certainty or control, our response is, what's wrong? And it's like, that to me is such a debilitating approach.
Just so I know there because it implies, using
It,
the word wrong implies that there is a right, meaning that there is some narrow definition of what right is. Yes, it's absolutely.
yeah, and often it is, of course you don't feel certain. Of course you don't feel in control. How could you in this moment?
Yes.
You
How
know,
do you see
I
this?
just think
Yeah.
being able to identify those feelings is such a powerful
Yes.
process of grounding ourselves when we're stressed. It's like, no, of course you feel this way.
It's incredibly like even just hearing you say that right now. I can feel how yes, validating and also you feel seen. This is kind of a big thing for me. Like when someone says that, you feel so acknowledged and seen and not sort of reduced to some box that you're supposed to be in, but rather seen for the entirety of who you are. And it's such a powerful thing to your point, what you just said.
But
How
it's
do you,
even it's powerful when we see it ourselves. I share in my
yeah,
book I knew my job. I knew I had done my job as a teacher when a student came into class one day. She was late. She was, and she runs sort of across in front of me, and she's, all flustered. And she sits down, and I'm like, okay, I'll bite. What's going on? And she says, I'm sorry, professor. I'm in the lower left-hand corner of the stress center. I had a fight with my roommate last night. I overslept this morning and I have an organic chemistry test. But then she starts to smile. And she starts to smile because she says, I know that when I'm done my organic chemistry test, I won't feel the way I do. I will go back and mend things with my roommate. And I thought, yeah, just knowing she knew where she was, she knew it wasn't going to last, that life moves her around. And I think that sometimes if we can just visualize it ourselves, to go, oh yeah, I'm in the stress center. We in our house we'll say this to each other. I'm in the stress center today. Just and it immediately helps others to sometimes it's so why is there what can I do to help, but it's not an antagonistic, a good or a bad. It's just this is where I see myself now.
and just so you know, in our community, we have been using your terminology as well. We've been saying, "Oh, I'm in the stress center today,"
Yeah.
and like we have been using that, and it has been very. You're right. It has been enormously helpful in terms of our communication and for us to kind of understand one another. Peter, how do you see this on a more? We've been talking about it from an individual standpoint, but this applies on so many levels in society. Whether it's leadership at an organization, whether it's things that are happening economically, things that are happening within our world. How do you see these kind of this interplay of these narratives, possibilities, and when, for example, and you talked about this in your book, but again, I would like to share with our audience about, for example, an uncertain time like the pandemic, when to your point, unprecedented. Unprecedented was everything, and then how organizations, leadership reacted to it, and what that tells us about how we move, or perhaps the choices that we make within the different zones.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm really troubled by today is the volume of predators who seem to have come out of the woodwork. The stress center is the sort of the feeding ground of the predator. people feeling intensely vulnerable, feeling powerless, feeling uncertain. And the predator says, follow me. And sometimes it's not hard. I mean, if you stand in the rain, in a cold rain long enough, you will get in the car with anybody. So their message doesn't have to be all that seductive. But I watch all of these reptiles of the swamp who are preying on the vulnerable and saying, follow me. I have the answer. I am the light in the way. And those that follow do not recognize the peril, because the predator wants you not only in the passenger seat, but to never leave the passenger seat. That they will continue and continue to make you more and more powerless in order to keep you there. They have no wish that you ever re-enter the comfort zone. And I think that individuals need to be much more careful about who they follow in these moments when they're in the stress center. Because I think we're terrible judges of those that we choose to follow. Again, we pick the easy, not the smart answer.
So that brings up a number of things for me. I remember when I was in my early 20s, and I had had several traumatic experiences that put me deep in the stress center. To your point, I was a terrible judge of character. I was a terrible judge of who to be around, what influences I let into my life that I think kept me for many years, as I said, in that I got put into the passenger seat until I
So
managed
I'm
to
going to
figure out how.
reframe that.
Okay.
You were not a terrible judge. You were an
Oh,
inexperienced judge.
you know, that's true. That's true. Very important, Mike. Yes, I was an inexperienced judge of character because I had never seen anything outside of that. It had been my
Mm-hmm.
experience thus far, and so therefore it was familiar to me. And so, certainly for me, in my own life, it has taken me many years of a variety of experiences to really get to a point where I am very selective about who I allow into my energy, into my space, and um, what was interesting was that over the past year, uh, we had an incident within the studio in which there was someone who came in with not good intentions and did take advantage of some of the younger members of our community who, to your point, they were powerless. They were in the stress center. They were in a place, and what just devastated me was this notion that he took advantage of that vulnerability. This is, to me, absolutely unforgivable. That someone who is who has a dream of something, who is looking for something, and to take advantage. And I, to your point, his message was not complicated. It was very simple. It wasn't like, but he had a certain kind of, I think, he was able to present himself in a certain way in terms of authority that got people to follow him. My sort of I've never said this publicly, but it's okay. My sort of individual struggle in that moment was my personal struggle. Was certainly as a leader, I felt, imagine if something had happened in your classroom, right? Something terrible. I just felt like such a failure as a leader that I had allowed this person to come into our classroom, into our community, and then this happened. First, that. Second, and this is a much more personal sort of conflict that I had. I was devastated that, and now, of course, in retrospect, I can see where it was coming from. But at the time, I was devastated that they had chosen to follow his shallow sort of promises when I was right here and trying to help them be empowered. And I remember speaking with a friend and asking, why did they believe him over me? Why did they believe? Because he was also saying terrible things about me, and trying to separate them from
Hmm.
me. And so that also hurt, right? On a personal level, it hurt. Like, why would you believe that? I am not that. And why would you believe him? So that's also, I wonder if you have any sort of thoughts around that, like about how now I understand that it wasn't even about me. It was just where they were at, in terms of their powerlessness. And he was promising exactly what it was in a perhaps more easier way than I was. So, but I'm not sure. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, when individuals are in the stress center, it, it's not clear to me why they choose those they choose to hear. You know, and I know that this is a frustration with parents when a child is in the stress center and the child won't listen to the parents. Why don't you listen to me? I know it's, and it creates this battleground. Um, and so part of it is trying to find who are the voices that someone will listen to, and how do you identify others that can bring a positive message to someone, accept that they're not going to listen to you. So who would they listen to? When I think about during COVID, that how do you get people to hear those messages? And often, they went to, they went to churches or community groups, or they found resonant voices of status and authority inside of a community. And so you have to think about who are those voices that will sort of penetrate all of the conflicting narratives. It's hard.
I love that. It's hard, and I love what you said about how framing it from, like, for example, a parent talking to their child, because it is exactly that. Of course, the parent loves their child deeply.
Yeah,
No one else has a greater, like,
yeah.
interest in caring for you and loving you. Why are you listening to? Very, yes. That it was exactly that kind of feeling, and you're right to find someone, an ally who can help maybe address the issue in a different way than you can. And yeah,
Yeah, or just be comfortable. Often you'll see couples struggling. One who's traditionally been the advice giver, and suddenly the child is taking advice from the other one, and it's like, you know, not that the person disagreed with the advice, but it's like being jealous that in this moment of stress, why didn't the child come to me? Why they go to you? They never go to you. Um,
yeah. I love that. Okay, all right. That actually, I feel so much better after talking with you about it. That's wonderful. But that's such a. I think also with the things happening politically right now, there's a lot that I think I always approach things from a because I'm a writer and also a communicator as a marketer. I notice the rhetoric, right? The narrative. Who's controlling the narrative? How is the narrative being spun so that
yeah.
the following happens, which is very interesting on X. I wanted to ask you about vulnerability. Again, and this is something that we have discussed previously, but I love this so much that I want you to own all of this. So, vulnerability is often presented, of course, through Brene Brown and a lot of how to books about as being equatable to authentic. And you and I have spoken about how there is a difference. We talked about the etymology of the word vulnerability, in which, yes, you're in a state of powerlessness. It's not something versus authenticity, in which there is agency and you own what it is that you choose to share honestly about yourself. Vulnerability is a place in which um, what happens to us that puts us into the stress center. How do you see this in terms of leadership? And we have seen some things on LinkedIn, I think, especially over the past few years, in which leaders will say, I'm being vulnerable. And for me, as a social media strategist, it is absolutely like nails on a chalkboard when I see those posts in which, they'll do a crying selfie or they'll do something that is extraordinarily uh, self centered in the name of vulnerability. Can you share some of your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think true vulnerability is involuntary. And so if you can choose not to do what you're doing or not to feel what you're feeling, you're not vulnerable. I don't know quite what it is you are, but you are not experiencing real vulnerability because you would never choose powerlessness. You would never choose uncertainty in a way that was never going to be certain again. So I have a lot of respect for the work that Brene Brown does, but I would reframe a lot of her work in terms of authenticity and encouraging people to be more transparent with their feelings and to say what they really mean. But I agree with you. When a leader talks about choosing to be vulnerable, it's like
It's
you're a
just,
leader.
yeah,
You you don't know what vulnerability means. You can end this meeting, you can end this experience at any time. Vulnerability is the people who work for you in that meeting.
yes,
Their certainty and control is far less than yours. Um,
very
and I
tone
and
deaf.
we didn't
Yeah,
say it here, but one of the things that I've learned from you is that the etymology of vulnerability is wound, and I love that because that is how we feel in that moment. We feel wounded.
yes, yes. It's just so if you are a leader watching this, please don't frame it in terms of vulnerability. That is very, to Peter's point, it comes across as extremely tone deaf, and not understanding of, yes, the involuntary. I love that involuntary nature of what vulnerability actually is. Um, I would like to hear a little bit about, and this is a little bit more on a personal bent, but I would love to hear a little bit more about your composition and your music composition. Is that something you do in your comfort zone? Is that something that's like an ongoing pleasure for you?
Yeah, I mean, one of my first purchases after I got my own apartment um, was a piano. Um, I There'd always been a piano in my house, but um, I had a very fruitless experience with piano lessons as a kid. As both my parents would tell you, I'm not a child who liked to be told what to do. And being handed a piece of music, play this, that was not a good relationship with me and the instructor. At the same time, music had always been in our house. And so I started to learn to play by reading the guitar chords that often accompanied piano music. And to this day, I cannot play left and right the way they are written. If you watched me try to play music, you'll see me writing out letters, actual, A, B, C for the left hand because I don't read
Ah,
the
I
the
see.
left the left staff along with the right.
Yeah.
But where that led me was, um, I would say I paint with music. I sit and whatever I'm feeling, I just allow it to happen. Is it and here I give lots of I forever blessed for being on an airplane once and listening to somebody like George Winston, who was who moved from jazz into painting with music. And my wife and I will see a movie and she'll be like, oh, the dialogue was amazing. It's like, yeah, but did you hear the music? um, so
It's
I to
I
me
love
it's
it because
it,
your wife is an act. She's an actress, correct? She's an
yes,
actor. Your wife, yes.
she was a professional actress. Um, and to me it's all about the soundtrack that goes with it.
Yeah, that's so okay. So that opens up an interesting door that I want to just peek through. The I love what you said about painting with sound because one of the things that I am very passionate about, and I try to encourage others to also do, is this idea of being able to make correlations between different ideas, that maybe disparate ideas that normally we wouldn't be able to connect. When I do anything artistic, for example, if I was working on a piece by Debussy or Ravel, I immersed myself in French poetry, or I went to the museum, immersed myself in painting, and I would study impressionistic works to see how those layers, those strokes built up, and I would come back to the piano and try to paint those different layers of sound in the same way that Monet would create, for example, water. And I'm a big believer in being able to do that, and it's so interesting because the same thing about what you said about movies. I am very sensitive also to the sound, to the music in movies, but I'm also, I think movies are such a fantastic way to see how that works, where you can have a certain tonality, a certain harmony in music. What is the color that is being painted cinematographically, cinematically
Hmm.
across the screen to create a certain mood, to suggest a certain emotion? And it's something that I actually wanted. I'm thinking of doing a masterclass next month because I think, and this is probably tied to elements of control and this sort of framing things in a very contained box, that we don't often encourage people to be able to think outside of that enough to start connecting disparate ideas. If you're a scientist, to look at art. If you're an artist, to look at quantum
Oh,
physics. If you're like, and to be able to do that. Any thoughts around that?
yeah. I mean, they particularly in eras, the fashion, the music, the painting, the architecture, they're all interwoven because it's the same confidence being expressed in different ways. Um, when I do a class during the semester on design, and so I'll put up architecture, cars, fashion, you know, and then say, okay, what would you imagine that looks like at a peak in confidence? And what you see is that the elements transcend the the form of design. That
Yes, yes.
that what you see in autos looks like our buildings, sounds like the music. It's all in sync. It
Confidence as artistic expression. This is fascinating, Peter. Oh, that really is staying with me right now. Yeah,
yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, so and you could add film because in Lows in Confidence you have all those horror movies. I mean, in fact, you could watch the Harry Potter movies get darker and darker as
Yes,
confidence.
yes, yeah.
But you know what you also see is have fun. Take a very somber movie and overlay the Looney Tunes music.
Yeah.
And what you start to see, you can say that it's music, but really what it is story. And so what you begin to realize is our stories and our mood have to exist in equilibrium. That a happy story, happy music with a dark movie is not, that doesn't work. And so we need to appreciate that our story will always mirror our mood and to be careful about that.
Peter, I can think of no better way of ending this conversation than with that absolutely brilliant. That really is going to stay with me. What you just said about art and confidence. Where can everybody find you? How can they connect with you?
So they can find me on LinkedIn. They can find me on Twitter at Peter underscore Atwater or at my website, peteratwater.com.
Everyone, please do check out Peter's book, The Confidence Map. I will link to it below. Peter, I every conversation with you, I am left beaming with 1,000 doors open in my mind now of things that you have sparked within me and inspired within me. Thank you so much for the work that you do, for the deeply humanistic and sensitive way in which you approach these topics. I think we need more of that in this world. And so I am so grateful that you shared your time again so generously with me today. And I appreciate you so much.
No, and likewise, Grace, you're a glutton for punishment, but it is truly a highlight to just come and spend time with you and talk about these topics. It your questions get me thinking about things in a different way, so I'm delighted. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.